Example 3, solving one-step equations, but ones that now have exponents, and they're the last ones in the BEDMAS. So the very first questions that we did, example 1, dealt with, well, how do you get rid of addition subtractions? So we did those. And then we did, how do you get rid of any multiply and divides? So we did those. Lastly here, we've got exponents. So that's how we're gonna now do with that, how to get rid of exponents. Brackets seem like they're the last thing, but as it'll turn out, those will actually be one of our first things. We'll take a look at that later though. So let's look at example 3. I need to get the x alone. And what you need to know is think of a number, like we can just do this in our heads. What number squared would get you 81? Well, 9 squared. Now if I had 9 squared, I would get 9 times 9, which is 81. Right? So 9 squared means 9 times 9, and 9 times 9 is 81. Now there's another option. You've got negative 9 squared. Now, negative 9 squared, remember squared means anything, and when you square something, that means times it by itself, which is why up here, 9 squared was 9 times itself, or 9 times 9. Here, it's negative 9 times itself, which is another negative 9. 9 times 9 is 81, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So there's actually two answers. You have an answer of 9, and you have an answer of negative 9. So we're going to need to make sure that we get two answers for these. Let me just erase this. Okay, so now let's actually do this. What is the mathematical way in terms of solving for x or getting x alone? To get x alone, we need to get rid of the squared. So I'm just letting you know right now, to get rid of a squared, you need to square root. And we haven't, I don't know if we've learned this yet. Whenever you do the left, you have to do it to the right. But a square root symbol is actually means to the power of a half. So if I had 16 to the power of a half, that looks very strange, but what that really means is 16 square rooted. And you should know that the square root of 16 is going to be 4. So power of a half means the same thing as squared. So if you have an x squared, and then what I'm doing is I'm square rooting it, what that really means is the power of a half. Now 2 times a half, 2 halves, or a half of 2 is 1. And you should remember that x to the power of 1 we don't write, we just, as x to the 1, we just write as x. So if I do the power of a half, those will just cancel, and I'll be left with 1. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to go to the power of a half. But for some reason, we have given a special symbol to that, and that is the square root symbol. So what you need to know is if you square root for an x squared, those will cancel out. And so you're left with x equals the square root of 81. Now the square root of 81 we know is 9. However, we did know that this would be plus or minus. So whenever a plus 9 or a minus 9, either of them, remember 9 squared is 81, but negative 9 squared is also 81 because the negative times a negative is a positive. So what you also need to remember is that whenever you have a square root that cancels out a square, you're going to have to put a plus or minus. You're going to have to tell the reader it could be a positive 9 or it could be a negative 9. So moving on here, x squared equals 100. So I will, to get the x alone, square root both sides. Those will cancel, and I'm left with x is equal to square root of 100 is 10. And then just remember that you have to put the plus or minus because it could be plus 10 or it could be minus. Again, whenever you square root to cancel out a squared, it will give you a plus or minus. Again, here I need to get rid of an x squared, so I will square root both sides. Now this is a fraction, and so it looks kind of strange. However, the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 4 is 2. And then don't forget the plus or minus. So what I did there is I did the square root of 9 over the square root of 4. I just separated it, and you are allowed to do that, and we'll learn more about that in grade 10 and grade 11. And lastly, I need to get this alone, so I'll cancel out the square with the square root, and I do that to both sides. So now my x is alone, and the square root of 16 is 4, the square root of 25 is 5. Don't forget the plus or minus. So that goes through almost all of them, so I'll zoom out here. We haven't done the b, but in example 1, 2, and 3, we did the add, subtract, the multiply, divide, and the exponents. And so now we're going to put them all together, and we'll do some 2-step and then 3, 4, 5, 6 step equations.